On today's Locked On Thunder podcast, Isaiah Hartenstein is sidelined for 5 to 6 weeks. What does that mean for the Thunder? Where do they go from here?
You are Locked On Thunder, your daily Oklahoma City Thunder podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Let's get it going on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. I am your host, media member, and beat writer for Thunder on SI, Rylan Stiles. Follow me on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. Follow the show on Twitter at LOThunderPod. Email the show, LOThunderPod@gmail.com. On today's show, brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Go check them out today and start the year with a big return at FanDuel. You place your first $5 bet, you'll start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed at FanDuel.com to get started. We're talking about the Thunder losing Isaiah Hartenstein for 5 to 6 weeks. Who will step up in his place, and what will be the outcomes from this injury? Again, still battling allergies, sore throat, so the voice is terrible, but the show goes on every single day. Hopefully we're back, but I promise this will not last too long, but you have to bear with me a little bit on the voice, but still going to get some shows out for you. When you look at this injury, of course it came out of nowhere. Just before shoot around today, the team announced that Hartenstein would be out for 5 to 6 weeks with a injury in his non-displaced fracture in his left hand. It was suffered in the second half of Tuesday's game against Denver. And so the immediate reaction to this news has just been for people to panic. And obviously that's the way social media works. But I do think that this is still a scenario where we just don't know enough. And it comes down to if you're a glass half full or glass half empty kind of person. So from all the sports doctors out there on Twitter, it appears that this injury is relatively smooth in terms of recovery, and you hardly ever really see anything linger or be sustained past this recovery timeline. So that's great news right out of the chute. So this will be, 5 to 6 weeks. One of those weeks is this week-long layoff leading into the season opener after tonight's preseason game. As another note, recording this at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Thursday. So if Mark gave any update pregame against Atlanta, we will not have that information here on this show, but you can always find that on Twitter at Rylan_Stiles. So the injury itself, while an absolute bummer for 5 to 6 weeks, and it's a bummer to not get to see your biggest free agent signing in franchise history take the floor to start this season, which was filled with pomp and circumstance and being title contenders and being the favorites out west and all the excitement that went into this season. While that is a big damper, it's also not the doomsday scenario, or might not be the doomsday scenario that was being portrayed once this news actually hit. Now, these injuries have came in threes. So so far this preseason, you've seen Jaylin Williams, J-Will, go out with a hamstring injury. You've seen Kenrich Williams go out with a knee injury. And now Isaiah Hartenstein go out with a hand injury for 5 to 6 weeks. J-Will and Kenrich will be reevaluated after the preseason, which ends tonight. So again, Mark could update on both those guys or neither of those guys ahead of the finale of the preseason. But as of right now, all we know is that they're going to be reevaluated after the preseason. That determination, that reevaluation will be critical. The Thunder really need at least one of those guys back. I mean, obviously, you'd hope they both are back because that puts everything back on the table. But you need at least one of those guys back, and you'd honestly probably prefer it to be J-Will just because he was the backup center a year ago. And so that's the perspective that you really have to keep when discussing this injury and discussing what this means for the Thunder, what this means for the season. first and foremost, no matter what, this is such a shortened amount of time in the grand scheme of things. It's a very long season and such a favorable portion of the schedule that I don't think it dooms any goals the Thunder have. I mean, you look at how they were integrating Hartenstein in the preseason. It didn't look clunky. It didn't look like something that they needed to iron out. Clearly, they want more time together. Clearly, they want more of a runway to play together. But it wasn't as though things were alarming in the preseason and you're like, man, they need all the time they can get. Like, they looked pretty good together, giving it was Isaiah and Chet, and the first time Chet playing with the big man in the NBA. Like, that stuff looks so good that should alleviate some of your worries. Again, it's only 5 to 6 weeks, and it's so devastating right now because you were on the precipice of what was going to be a all-time high and all-time adrenaline rush season opener, one that hasn't really been matched since the OK3 season, whenever you had the Carmelo's debut and you had Paul George and Russ. Like, this was going to match it, I think maybe even surpass that season opener. So that's a huge, Debbie Downer for that aspect. But in terms of the win record and the playoff positioning and their end goals of trying to win a championship, I don't think it impacts that in the slightest. However, there's a lot of questions as you enter this season. And these questions can vary from, yeesh, you can quickly look, and again, this goes back to glass half full or glass half empty. You can look at it one way before we get the rest of the information and say, well, they have no depth now, and I don't know what they're going to do in the front court. Or you can say they're still vastly improved from last season, even with this injury. We'll talk about each side of that coin coming up. But first, I want to say right now about our good friends over at HIMSHims. Guys, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously, and we always want to be ready so we can perform in the bedroom. HIMS provides access to treatments that can help you stay hard and last longer, giving you the boost of confidence so you can be ready whenever the mood strikes. Check out HIMS today, because HIMS is changing men's healthcare by providing you the access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Start your free visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. hims.com/lockedon. The product mentions are chewable compounded products, which are not approved or verified for safety or efficiency by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based upon product and subscription plan. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. So the news hit today from the team that Isaiah Hartenstein is out 5 to 6 weeks, and there was an immediate rush of, it's over, the sky is falling, it's the Chicken Little syndrome that happens throughout social media. And there is some credence to that if these other dominoes fall, right? So here's the deal. There's always the possibility that the reevaluation date is not the return to play date. And that's impactful for Hartenstein, but more intimate, more pressing, that's a factor for Jaylin and Kenrich. If Jaylin and Kenrich get reevaluated tonight, tomorrow, Saturday, whenever they're going to get reevaluated after the preseason, if they get reevaluated and they're not ready for the season opener, oh gosh. I mean, at that point, you're looking at Ousmane Dieng, the very timid Ousmane Dieng, playing a small ball 5, who has been inconsistent even in this preseason, who has played small ball 5 at times in the G League and has looked good at it, but this is a whole different animal. This is a whole different, kind of demand of him, because in the G League, as we've mentioned on the show before, you can get away with that a lot more because the G League is more similar to Summer League, where not every team has a big man. Even if they do have a big man, they're not necessarily playing them heavy minutes because you want to get wings on the floor and evaluate them and try to prepare them for a potential jump to the NBA. So it's just a totally different game in the G League, to where you can utilize him as a small ball five more. And the issues that you've seen with Us so far in his NBA career has been that of, like we said, timid, not wanting to mix it up. And that's stuff you can't do as an undersized center. So he's one of your options whenever Chet's off the floor. Rookie Dillon Jones is another option. And while Dillon Jones has been very impressive in the preseason, and I think that he's carved out an opportunity for himself in the preseason, and I think he's probably already supplanted and surpassed Us as, under this doomsday scenario, the guy I would give the first crack to at a small ball five spot. That's not an ideal role for Dillon Jones, a guy who, comes into the NBA with question marks defensively, needing to get up to speed on that end of the floor. And, for as good as he's been in the preseason, you've seen 4 games. In one of those games, he racked up 5 fouls in 3 seconds. And you're going to be put in compromised positions to be collecting fouls as an undersized five. So you can't afford to give any away in that process, especially if you're the last man standing. So that's sort of the doomsday scenario. The Thunder do have an open roster spot left available to them. They only have 14 standard contracts signed right now. But who's out there? I mean, Mike Muscala is retired. He's done playing basketball. Bismack Biyombo's out there. He's familiar with the system. He's somebody who filled in pretty admirably for a Memphis team that was riddled with injuries a year ago before coming to Oklahoma City to end the season. But are they really going to go that route? I don't know. I wouldn't expect a roster move, but this is all dependent on the injury update regarding J-Will and regarding Kenrich. Because for as dire as it sounds, and for as dire as you lead up to this point, the bottom line is, if J-Will is healthy, if J-Will can play on opening night, this is a 57-win core and the same 57-win rotation from a year ago. Sans your worst player a year ago in Josh Giddey in terms of fit. Again, I know there's still some Josh Giddey holdouts that listen to the show. Josh Giddey, not the worst player as an individual, but the worst player in terms of the play style for the Thunder. Swapping him out for Alex Caruso, who is a massive upgrade in terms of play style and fit and role, and can defend 1 through 4 comfortably. Like, you still got worlds better from what your 57-win mark was a year ago. So long as J-Will or even Kenrich, who played small ball five for the Thunder before, can get back and can play on opening night, there is literally no reason to worry, because of what we mentioned before. Of every doctor that you see on Twitter has said these injuries don't really have the potential to linger or to carry over through the return to play date. So I just think that you never want injuries, but it seems like this is an injury that is as good as possible for his long-term success this season. It's happened at the right time, where you're still going to have plenty of time to gel and groove and integrate him into the roster, which already looked up to speed in 2 games with the regulars in the preseason. And if J-Will is healthy, like if that one thing changes and we find out that J-Will can play on opening night, which his reevaluation date is coming soon, then this team is still better than they were a year ago. And a year ago, they won 57 games, and they have a weak part of the schedule to open up. They have an easy part of their schedule to open up the season. So you see how in the middle of this segment, we just quickly can switch it back to how the glass is half full. So the bottom line is we just don't know enough right now. Because if Jaylin and Kenrich can't play to start the year, well, then we're back to the first part of this segment, which is, oh my goodness, what are they going to do? Like someone needs to step up in a massive way. Then you're looking to explore 5-guard lineups. You're looking to explore Aaron Wiggins playing the 5. You might need to dip into your J-Dub at the 5 lineups that you saw a year ago, which I think that you would prefer not to have to do early in this season to kind of manage him a little bit. All bets are off, right? If neither one of those guys can play. But if these everything can be alleviated by the outcome of J. Will and the outcome of Kenrich. But obviously, it's never good to have an injury. It's always going to be a bummer. I just don't think it's as dire and awful as a lot of people do. I still think that this team will win over 60 games. I still think that this team will be the top of the West. I still think that this team will reach the Western Conference Finals, and we'll talk all next week about how far they can get past that. But the only real thing that this does is shift how the season starts. And if there was ever a segment of the season that you could afford an injury, it would be like this one. It would be like this segment of the season where you have a lot of home games, you're playing a lot of teams that you're just flat out better than, and things worked out in your favor that way. Coming up, injury news is not the only conversation in Oklahoma City. It's also a conversation in LA. We'll talk about that coming up. But first, I want to say right now, but our good friends over at FanDuel, check out FanDuel today because the NFL season's in full swing. But if you want to start basketball season with a big return at FanDuel, America's #1 sports book, whether you want to bet in the middle of games, you want to bet the spreads, player props, over-unders, whatever, you can bet it all at FanDuel.com and go there right now because when you place your first $5 bet, you'll get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. FanDuel.com, you place a $5 bet, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place that bet. So go check it out today at FanDuel.com. If you already want to jump on an NBA line, before the Isaiah Hartenstein injury, the Thunder were 2.5-point underdogs to Denver. And now, following this injury, the line currently sits with the Thunder in Denver as 2.5-point underdogs still. So you can see kind of if you want to jump on that or not for opening night. We're back on the Locked On Thunder podcast, on the Locked On Podcast Network, your teams every day. Thank you so much for making us your first listen every single morning, every single day. We're here for you, talking Thunder basketball. Folks, we're talking Isaiah Hartenstein injury, but the Thunder are not the only team dealing with injuries. You can go check out Locked On NBA for the national aspect of this sport. You can go check out Locked On Clippers for this aspect that we're talking about right now, which is Kawhi Leonard. Shams Charania of ESPN now, Shams Charania, tweeted out that Los Angeles Clippers star Kawhi Leonard is expected to be sidelined indefinite to start the season as he rehabilitates his right knee. Anytime that the word, like an indefinite timeline, like there's no pinpointed time, that's never a good sign in most cases. It's really never a good sign in terms of it being a quick recovery. So that rules out the start of the season. That puts a lot of pressure on James Harden. The Clippers owe the Thunder an unprotected pick in this draft, which is a loaded draft class. They're going to start behind the 8 ball in terms of making even the play-in tournament out west. Because if you believe in the Spurs, if you believe in the Rockets, like whoever you believe in to make a jump, again, Memphis needs to jump people to get back in because I think that they're so good. That's 3 teams right there that did not make the play-in a year ago that I think got a lot better this offseason that can threaten their way to the play-in or better. For Memphis, I think that they can threaten the top 6, even top 4 seed if everything goes right for Memphis. But like those are teams who need spots. Those are teams who need someone to fall out. And if you're losing Kawhi for an indefinite amount of time, which again, anytime that you use indefinite, it's rarely, if ever, a 2-week thing or even a month thing, hardly. So this seems bad for the Clippers. If James Harden can take them to the promised land, that's fantastic for the Clippers. But how much do you bank on that happening whenever the rest of the team is just role players? And again, don't want to discredit James Harden, because we've seen him be a ceiling elevator in the regular season and a win total elevator in the regular season. The issue is, can he play every single night at this age? And can he again lead this team as a heliocentric player to go create wins and go keep the Clippers even afloat without Kawhi? So that Clippers pick, you can't even describe how valuable it is. I mean, you can't even describe how valuable it is, because we've also seen this song and dance before with Kawhi of the hokey pokey of, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? He's in the Olympics. Now he's out of the Olympics. He'll be ready for opening night. Now he won't be ready for opening night. Now he's out indefinitely. He hasn't even practiced yet. Like, this stuff, it is a dire situation for the Clippers. And I know that people are going to daydream about Cooper Flagg. I totally get it. Cooper Flagg is one of those guys. Like, he's one of those guys that you throw around the word generational, that you look at as a surefire number 1 overall pick, and that anyone who's trying to convince you that he's not number 1 pick is just overthinking it. Like, he is the guy. He is the best prospect in this draft. But this draft is also really deep. So in order for this pick to really help the Thunder, it doesn't have to be Cooper Flagg. I mean, it could even just be the 12th overall pick again in this draft that is extremely valuable. But especially if you get top 10, if you get top 5, like in this class, whenever you're going to see someone of the Ace Bailey, Dillon Harper, VJ Edgecombe, someone of that ilk have to fall because there's just not enough slots to go around, man, the Shea trade is the gift that keeps on giving for Oklahoma City, and a nightmare that the Clippers cannot wake up from. It makes the decision to let Paul George walk even more peculiar, because of all the owners to not care about the price tag. It should have been Steve Ballmer to not care. It should have been Steve Ballmer to just give whatever money it took to keep Paul George around, the extra year, whatever he wanted, because there is no get out of jail free card, right? Like, for example, the Jazz. Like, the Jazz, they did the Derek Favors salary dump, and they now owe the Thunder a pick in the future, which is again coming up this season. But it's a top 10 protected pick. So all the Jazz have to do is once again duck into the bottom 10 of the standings and get a top 10 pick in the draft, and they don't owe the Thunder that pick. There is nothing the Clippers can do to retain their pick. So you really had no ability to save this season and salvage this season if Kawhi got hurt. You double hurt your franchise. Whereas if they still had Paul George, yes, this would not be ideal, but it's a lot easier to manage everything with 2 guys of Harden and Paul George patchworking their way through the regular season and trying to keep the team upright while Kawhi's out, than it all falling on James Harden and it all being on him. With all that being said, I want to reiterate, James Harden is incredible. Like, he is one of the best players of all time. He's going to be someone who consistently raises the ceiling of a team. But Father Time is undefeated except for against LeBron. And we'll just have to see where that lands for Harden and what this does for a team of role players who, like a Derrick Jones Jr., who I think was excellent for Dallas. And he was just awesome last year. Can you duplicate that? Because I do have this, theory or thought of, like, a Najee Marshall, for example, going to Dallas here. How much of that was the Luka effect or the Tom Brady effect or the Patrick Mahomes effect? Like, when you play with these great quarterbacks, they can make lesser than receivers elevate their game, elevate their production. I think Luka did that in a big way for Derrick Jones Jr. Harden, similar play style, similar player in his prime to Luka. Does he still have that gravity and effect to boost Derrick Jones Jr.? Can that translate to the Clippers? And for Najee Marshall, I think that he can see a career high year playing off of Luka. But they're banking on a lot of role players to at least steady where they were from a year ago. I'm not sure can happen. They're banking on James Harden to be the Houston version of James Harden, which he physically looks incredible this season. Like, he looks ready for that challenge. But there's no ifs, ands, or buts that this is a bad deal for the Clippers. Because when that indefinitely timeline gets thrown around, it's just, especially with Kawhi, we've seen do this before. Like, I don't know. I think that you can be pretty positive that the Thunder have another lottery pick coming off of another great season. So we can end the pod with a little bit of boost to an otherwise down fan base today. Until next time, be good and be good to one another.